What happened while we were away, brought to you by Unexpected. After tempering expectations about this weekend's trade talks in Switzerland with China, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a lot more progress was made than expected and added that the Biden administration didn't do their own country any favors.
In January 2020, President Trump produced a template. We had an excellent trade agreement with China, and the Biden administration chose not to enforce it. The Chinese delegation basically told us that once President Biden came into office, they just ignored their obligations. This is a pause down to 10%. The April 2nd level for China is 34%. So we will be working to see where their final reciprocal number ends up. And the negotiations are a combination of tariffs, non-tariff trade barriers, currency manipulation, and subsidies of labor and capital.
At the White House this morning, President Trump went into more detail about what the talks with China accomplished.
And they've agreed to open China, fully open China. And I think it's going to be fantastic for China. I think it's going to be fantastic for us. And I think it's going to be great for unification and peace. China will also suspend and remove all of its non-monetary barriers. They've agreed to do that. Well, they're very numerous. But again, to me, the biggest thing that came out of that meeting is they've agreed. Now we have to get it papered, but they've agreed to open up China.
This morning, Trump also signed an executive order that aims to punish Big Pharma for charging higher prices to Americans than to the rest of the world. Here's FDA Commissioner Marty Makary at the signing ceremony.
I've been a surgical oncologist at Johns Hopkins for 22 years, and I have seen patients suffer. We didn't take an oath to heal patients and then watch their life get ruined financially, with their home, mortgage, retirement, going down the drain with GoFundMe campaigns, raising money from church communities and synagogues and friends they haven't seen in 20 years to try to raise money for what? For a system where Americans have been getting ripped off by 10, 12, 15 times higher prices than we see in other countries. The fundamental problem in healthcare is that we've had non-competitive markets. And we can do little things around the edges, or we can transform those markets to competitive markets. And that's what this executive order does today.
By the way, Trump is leaving for his big trip to Saudi Arabia and other countries today. After pressure from Trump, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is set to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin this week in Turkey. On their way back from a meeting in Ukraine with the former, the heads of state for Germany, France, and the United Kingdom let media into their train cabin when French President Macron awkwardly and hurriedly grabbed and hid what appeared to be a small baggie with a white powder inside. German Chancellor Merz appeared to do the same thing with a small coffee stirrer. Just bizarre behavior. The only person in that video not acting exceedingly strange is British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who this morning channeled his inner Donald Trump on the issue of immigration.
Now, in a diverse nation like ours, and I celebrate that, these rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together. So when you have an immigration system that seems almost designed to permit abuse, that encourages some businesses to bring in lower paid workers rather than invest in our young people, or simply one that is sold by politicians to the British people on an entirely false premise, then you're not championing growth, you're not championing justice, or however else people defend the status quo. You're actually contributing to the forces that are slowly pulling our country apart. So yes, I believe in this. I believe we need to reduce immigration.
Federal judge in San Francisco says the Trump administration has to stop firing federal workers. Back in the White House, Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller says they're working on a workaround for judges trying to get in the way of their deportation program.
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. At the end of the day, Congress passed a body of law known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, which stripped Article 3 courts, that's the judicial branch of jurisdiction over immigration cases. So Congress actually passed, it's called jurisdiction stripping legislation. It passed a number of laws that say that the Article 3 courts aren't even allowed to be involved in immigration cases. Many of you probably don't know this. I'll give you a good example. Are you familiar with the term temporary protected status, or TPS, right? So by statute, the courts are stripped of jurisdiction from overruling a presidential determination or a secretarial determination on TPS when the Secretary of Homeland Security makes that determination. So when Secretary Noem terminated TPS for the illegals that Biden flew into the country, when courts stepped in, they were violating explicit language that Congress had enacted, saying they have no jurisdiction. So it's not just the courts aren't just at war with the executive branch. The courts are at war, these radical rogue judges, with the legislative branch as well, too.
Pope Leo XIV's brother in Chicago shared posts on social media calling Nancy Pelosi a drunk see you next Tuesday. Pope Leo's Florida brother has shared social media posts blasting woke ideology. Here's Pope Leo XIV himself a few years ago before being named a cardinal, not exactly speaking fondly of Pope Francis. He says, speaking in Spanish, quote, "Yesterday marked 10 years since Pope Francis's election. I knew Jorge Mario Bergoglio when he was Archbishop of Buenos Aires as the Augustinian general. I'd met him several times. When he was elected, I told some brothers, great, thank God, I'll never be a bishop. I won't say why, but not all meetings with Cardinal Bergoglio were mutually agreeable," end quote. And finally, what's stopping you from being like this woman? For those of you listening, what we're watching is a woman who showed up to her school board's meeting to oppose the board's favoritism towards trans ideology.
So correct. And I, Heather Fletcher, identify as a Board of Education member, and my pronouns are I won.
That's brilliant, and that's what happened while we were away.